And the other problem it has, more domestically, is the north, the cities, and Scotland. I went to Newcastle the other day, and I did a thing for the Conservatives, and there were very few. We don't have a single elected councillor on the City Council of Newcastle on time, and the infrastructure has collapsed of the party, which I remember in my days. There was a Tory seat there, and another one we hoped to win. You know, it was a perfectly good political situation, and now it's a disastrous one. Reclaiming that is a very difficult task, which we've hardly begun. Some of you know the situation in Cambridge, which in microcosm, well, the circumstances are different, but the result is much the same. And Scotland is a particular difficulty. The Tory infrastructure is very weak, and there's a real problem, which could topple over into real hostility towards the Scots. And this is something which in the Tory party has to watch very carefully, in my view. There's a real problem which Tammy Diel invented as a backbench Labour MP for West Lothian, and it's known among the cognoscenti as the West Lothian question. How do you justify Scots MPs at Westminster having votes, maybe decisive votes, on English legislation on matters which in Scotland are devolved, so that English MPs have no possible say on what happens in Scotland, on, say, schools and hospitals, or indeed Foxhound. And this has become, instead of being a theoretical thing, which raised a sort of giggle on a Tam's jokes, it's now becoming a real thing. And if we got it in the next Parliament, a hung Parliament, with a Labour government, but depending absolutely on Scottish votes for all its legislation, even if it only affected England and Wales, that would be unacceptable. And it's not any form of democracy. The answer is not to have, in my view, a great English Parliament, a new structure, but just to have a simple, except that these things are never quite simple, a rule that where the government proposes legislation which is to do with England, let's leave Wales out as a complication, to do with England, it requires a majority of English members' votes. It's not really too difficult, and a lot of huffing and puffing about it, but actually something like that is going to have to happen if we're going to avoid a collision. But what is wrong is to go beyond that, as some of our people have done, and say, oh, Gordon Brown is a Scot, he's no right to be Prime Minister of the UK. That's illiterate nonsense. He has a full right to be. He may be a very thoroughly bad Prime Minister when the time comes, I'm not talking about that, but he has the right as a Scot to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, of which Scotland is part. So we mustn't push this argument to absurdities, and there's a real danger. My last novel was about this, was about a British politician, excessive young politician, sort of Heseltine 40 years ago, if you see what I mean, who actually took up this cry and carried it to an extent which just about broke up the Union. So these are the problems, some of the problems which David Cameron has to face. And I simply say, this isn't a Tory party meeting, and I'm not being an evangelist, but just because this is my theme, I know him reasonably well. I wouldn't say I know him very well, but he took over my constituency. I was his MP, he's mine, and I see him and in touch with him reasonably often. And a lot of this is personality. The style is all there. I mean, he's made politics more interesting to lots of people. That's quite evident. What people don't really know is what's the substance, because that's not really being tested. I would just say that my own belief is that the substance is there, that when the difficult decisions come, as they will come in opposition, when the different policy groups report, and as they would certainly come in government, I think one would find that the substance was there. I think that he's trying to tackle what is one of the fundamental problems. After Peel, and all through the time between Peel and now, we've had parties trying to be coherent and disciplined, excessively so, so that candidates are equipped with briefing on everything, and they're kept in line on everything, in the knowledge that the media will spot some tiny candidate in depths of Cornwall or something saying something amiss. You know, that'll be headlines, and candidate repudiates the leader, what will the leader do, all that kind of stuff. And that centralisation has now reached, in my view, absurd lengths. And it's contrary to the way in which people, perhaps particularly people of your generation, think and act. And I think the age of the totally centralised party is on the way. People are, in my experience, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong, are actually very interested in the issues. You know, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate change, whether it's Europe, whether it's the war in Iraq, all those things, or the future of Africa, all these things are not boring, and people are interested in them. They don't make any connection between these issues and party politics. They don't see any longer that the party is a vehicle, the only vehicle, for coherent political decision making. And it's that the parties have lost, all parties, have lost that link between what they do and what actually interests the citizen. And it's remaking that link, showing that you do need parties, and in David Cameron's case, you do need a modern Conservative party, to pull together the issues, to thrash them out, not imposing, in my view, a centralised view. There's going to be much more diversity. It's back to the early 19th century, much when the local candidate was an important person. I think we'll go back to that, and not a bad thing, and do away with the excessive centralisation. Parties won't be able to afford it. That's one good thing. You know. So I think there's a movement here for decentralisation, for localism, which must affect the parties as well. But at the end of the day, you have to have a government. The government has to be coherent. We can't live in a sort of perpetual Italian-type political crisis the whole time. You've got to have cohesion. You've got to have a degree of discipline. And it's reconciling those two things, which he's going to have to do, and I think he's well equipped to do. And not only he, because the same problems afflict the Labour Party, not so much the Liberal Party, who've been decentralised and confused and self-contradictory forever, and nobody's agreed with their minds. But in a way, they've solved the problem by not having to solve it, because they're not going to be in power, and they can behave accordingly. For the two main parties, this is a real problem, which Cameron is tackling, and which Labour will have to tackle. And therefore, I think he's actually doing a job, just as Blair did a good job in his time as a communicator. I think Cameron is now doing a good job with British politics as a whole by this experimentation, by this changing of attitudes and style, and this attempt to rally a much wider set of opinion than the one which has normally in the last 2 decades been involved in